Man of Steel has proven to be as vulnerable as the mere mortals who've looked up to him for more than half a century. Superman died Wednesday. East Greg Agnew reports on a world without the first superhero.
I think I remember him best as a friend, because that's how I knew him. Not as the hero, but as someone who I fought with.
She's about to close the book on one of its legendary heroes. Jeannie Most reports, can it be true? Superman will die November 18th at the hands of a villain named Doomsday?
You know, I said, like, that Superman is the most realistic movie I've ever made, and it's about Superman, says something about the way I see movies and reality or whatever. You know, it's not like, it also says, like, you know, and it's not like people say, like, well, like, for instance, if it's Sucker Punch or Watchmen or whatever, like, oh, he likes stylized, he can only do like a stylized world because, you know, that's all he knows how to do. I hope that when they see those films in the future, they're like, oh, he's doing that on purpose. It's not like, you know what I mean? It makes those. Hopefully it shines a light on those other films and says, like, oh, that was by design. It wasn't like just random, you know, shot. You know, when I look at criticism of the film, whether or not people like the movie is different. Right. But the why they didn't like it is what really is disturbing compared to. It's one thing to say, like, oh, I don't like that idea. It's another thing to, like, just say, I don't like it because of this reason, when I'm like, oh my lord, like, okay, I blew it because, like, they're just not even understanding what I'm trying to say. You know, that's the tricky part.
In 1972, Irving Janis, a research psychologist, coined the term groupthink. This refers to a phenomenon that occurs when members of a group prioritize a consensus over a realistic evaluation of a particular situation. Some crave being right rather than being correct.
I didn't actually understand why this film didn't work until recently. I first saw BVS in theaters in 2016. I hated BVS and I couldn't put my finger on why. So I just regurgitated some opinions from Chris Stuckman or maybe YMS. I don't remember who I was watching back in high school.
With the power of the information superhighway, this phenomenon has unfortunately become all too common. We all, in some way, are guilty of this. Android versus iPhone, Xbox versus PlayStation, and Viagra versus Cialis.
He has an erection.
After the release of Batman v Superman, a form of blind hatred would reverberate across the DC universe. For some, the only thing that was for sure was death, taxes, and that Batman v Superman was terrible.
Your people are smart, they can handle it.
A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals, and you know it. 1,500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, everybody knew the Earth was flat, and 15 minutes ago, you knew that people were alone on this planet.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
While Man of Steel would get Superman's house in order and Batman v Superman laid the foundation for the universe, the DC universe was expanding at a breakneck pace with Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman on the horizon. Detractors made it clear that the road to Justice League was going to be a bumpy one. Regardless, most DC fans were excited for the future of the DCEU, with Suicide Squad featuring actors like Will Smith, Margot Robbie, and even a new take on the Joker by Jared Leto. And after years of failed attempts, we were finally getting a solo Wonder Woman.
This sets us up well, said Jeff Goldstein, Warner Brothers Distribution Executive Vice President. We're very proud of what we've made before in the DC world, and what's coming in front of us is really exciting.
There's no denying the initial buzz around Batman v Superman. It had a worldwide opening of $422 million, the second biggest for Warner Brothers and the fifth biggest of all time in 2016. It ended its run at a massive $873 million. I know what you're thinking. No, it's not the coveted $1 billion, but nearly $900 million is impossible to overlook. Despite all of this, there is still the dreaded second week drop.
Some fans may try to point to one particular reason Batman v Superman struggled at the box office after its first week. It wasn't just the critics, the fans, or social media, but in rare form, all three of these factors would contribute to the abysmal second week drop.
Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. 28% fresh. That is just rude.
The funny thing about Rotten Tomatoes is, at least from our perspective, this website was fairly irrelevant prior to Batman v Superman. We've always understood the premise. Back in our day, it used to be Roger Ebert give it 2 thumbs up.
And I suggested, why don't we just say thumbs up or thumbs down instead of yes or no? And eventually that grew into a big deal over 2 thumbs up, which meant that we both liked it. And 2 thumbs up or 2 big thumbs up would appear in a lot of movie ads, and it became a pretty famous catchphrase.
While that was just 2 critics' opinions, the Rotten Tomatoes score was perceived to be an all-encompassing opinion of every critic. Probably the most amusing part of this is a majority of people that point to the score as the end-all be-all answer to the quality of a movie don't even know how this score is generated.
Because Rotten Tomatoes uses a thumbs up, thumbs down method on everyone's reviews, it means that it kind of makes a vaguer statement of consensus, but we don't get a sense so much of people who have mixed ideas about a film.
Both Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk and Jordan Peele's Get Out are highly rated and certified fresh. But according to the Tomato Meter, Get Out edges out Dunkirk by 6 percentage points. If you saw these scores on the Fandango purchase page, you might think that critics rated Get Out higher than Dunkirk. The Rotten Tomatoes pages for each film shows that Dunkirk earned a higher average rating per review. Dunkirk earned a lower tomato meter because there was less agreement among critics.
The critics hammered BVS to no end. We got our first glimpse of how broken the Rotten Tomatoes algorithm really was. Additionally, skeptics took to social media and continued the dogpile, coming up with memes and videos, albeit funny, really didn't help the overall perception of BVS.
Well, the interesting thing is that
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Easily the most popular meme to come out of this shit show was Sad Affleck. While being slightly amusing, Affleck's reaction isn't necessarily what some fans may think it means. Most would say he knew Batman vs Superman was shit, but with that magic power of hindsight, it's likely due to him seeing the writing on the wall and realizing that the amazing take on these characters was about to be buried. With over 22 million views, it's clear to how just this one short video could influence fans.
It stinks. It stinks. It stinks.
From early on, it seemed the writing was on the wall for BVS when it comes to critics. Remember that line in the sand from part 2? Well, it seems critics may have followed and in some cases influenced the fans.
Everyone's a critic, right? When it came to Batman v Superman, that wasn't just a saying. Looking back at initial reviews, the editing always comes into question. Even to the most adamant defenders, the theatrical cut's editing was a failure. Now that being said, most critiques came across as people that just didn't pay attention.
What the actual fuck?
The double-edged sword that is YouTube. It gives voice to the voiceless, but the influence in which some content creators have on the success of a movie is vast. So when you hear amazing analysis like this,
here's Bruce Wayne landing in Metropolis and immediately getting into his private vehicle, a Jeep f***ing Renegade, the very definition of a common middle-class vehicle. I see one of these things at every goddamn stoplight. Bruce Wayne would be driving a Tesla, or at the very least a BMW, but not a goddamn Jeep.
You see the lights on the roof? This is clearly a security vehicle.
Is it ever explained how this Kryptonian vessel full of kryptonite crash landed in the Indian f***ing Ocean? Also, kryptonite.
What did you say?
Yeah, from the previous movie. What kind of stupid...
And dream sequences that are put in there for what seems like to be put in the trailer only.
Yeah, Batman, there's this dream sequence, Batman's wearing like a duster, like a trench coat, and he's in the desert, and then a ghost Robin? Is that supposed to be Robin?
I'll tell you who I'm pretty sure that is.
Okay.
And it's weird that it was a dream sequence, because if it wasn't a dream sequence, it would have been clever. I think that's the Flash. The Flash has time travel powers, because he can run faster than the speed of light.
Okay,
I mean, dream travel powers?
Not dream travel powers. If that wasn't a dream sequence, that would have been like a fairly clever hint for like movies to come.
Okay, fine, I'm cool, I'm fine.
2016 was an odd time for a fan of the comic book movie genre, specifically if you were a DC fan. It seemed, and later had been confirmed, that cognitive dissonance ran rampant throughout critics and bloggers when it came to BVS. The narrative seemed already written.
We should even say, I mean, we had like people behind the scenes at Screen Rant that wanted to write up like articles about, you know, why Zack Snyder should be like fired and stuff. And Rob, like Dye's Hand and I were like, hey, full stop. That movie starts shooting in 2 weeks, guys. Like, get
if
but like you locked
if
into
this
these
movie
films.
had been what reviewers who saw it early claimed it was, then we could have that conversation. But I think all of us here agree that that was hyperbolic. Not only like not exactly the most constructive conversation to have about it, but also just misleading, I think, because this was...
Well, yeah, and it's under the impression, but if you look at it, because I wrote up early review thing too, and it's interesting because what you're seeing is like something we've been talking about on the side for a long time, and people are just now beginning to realize. It's like, I think after the Gods of Egypt thing happened and Proyas flipped out, like there is this contingent where this stuff snowballs because, you know, you in New York, I can tell you firsthand, like everybody who went to that Batman Superman screening, they came out on the curb, they stood on the curb in front of the theater, and they said, well, that was crap, right, guys? Like, and then somebody else is like, yeah, like, and they're like, well, and then it just is a conversation in 40 minutes. They work themselves all up, and then they all go home and they're confident because everybody's going to write Batman Superman sucks.
There were people who were saying, you know, the movie isn't much fun. It's kind of this split between like, oh, I have a lot of fun watching movies that aren't fun.
Yeah,
you know,
that's again people projecting what they should. Whenever I hear that, I just automatically disregard. You're projecting what you think a comic book movie should be. I mean, I know who writes for Time. I know who wrote the Daily Beast. I know who wrote the EW review, NY Post review, Black Film. I mean, and a lot of the negative ones are all from the same circles. I mean, I'm on critic circles with these people, and they're in blog circles. They hang out. They drink at bars together. I mean, I'm not trying to badmouth any of them. I'm just saying there's a groupthink meant there. I think this is an interesting case because this is a serious groupthink mentality that openly challenges like a major studio's big like launchpad franchise thing. I think the game is going to be different after this. Like, I wonder how Warner Brothers is going to respond to all these people that they've probably, you know, 100%. Did stuff for, who came out and not just badmouth the movie, but shit on it, especially.
Yeah, well, and if you, I can't tell you how many reviews that I started reading that it opens with full-blown, like, loose shitting all over this, followed soon after by, look, it wasn't all bad. And it was like, okay, well, how about for the interest of actually making fans interested in reading your review, why not approach it like you do with most movies, where you don't say, okay, up front, here are the cons.
Well, yeah, when it's like, I mean, the way that people, we talked about this, and then we need to focus back. Because I think we're kind of back at a point. But I mean, the way that people were describing this as like a steaming turd or something like that is like, okay, well, I mean, that's not like...
Well, people are throwing around headlines like unmitigated disaster.
Oh, no. Guys, ready? GQ magazine, Helen O'Hara. Batman v Superman will make you hate Batman, Superman, and the Justice League. And it says that review thing is just, it's crap.
Going back to your critics thing, to bring that full circle. So critics, this is just something that happens. It's true. The story that you told about Kofi Outlaw is absolutely true. It happens all the time. Critics will band together after a screening. And the truth is, a lot of times they get together, they're just talking about what they just saw, right? So they'll get to them like, like, what did you think? What did you think? And once a consensus starts to develop in those conversations, depending on who the people are in that little group, they do sometimes make a little pact, and they decide to just run off and destroy a movie. You're like, oh my God, I'm totally, I'm going to write this. I don't have recordings of these conversations. Sure. I don't have video. You just have to take my word for it. But you could take other people. You could take Kofi Outlaw. You could take Chris Bumbrae. We aren't the first ones to say this, so it's out there and it happens. And I won't name names of people that do it, but they know who they are, and they do get together and they just have. They'll do it because not even because of the movie. Sometimes it'll be because the rep didn't get them a seat, or they're mad because the studio didn't send them to the last junket or something. So like, you know what, I'm gonna bomb their movie.
Whether it was simply a critic that was kind of butthurt because they didn't get an invite to the press junket, or some other motivations, some critics clearly had an agenda against Batman v Superman. And after its release, and even before, we were given some of the oddest articles and videos depicting why BVS was a bad movie. Because of the twisted thought process, you begin to see articles with an agenda. From Slash Film, Batman v Superman art reveals that Robin was also a murderous psychopath. Sherlock here thinks due to the violent nature of Robin's weapon, this implies that Robin was also killing criminals alongside Batman when he was alive.
Man, sit your dumb ass down.
Another from Digital Spy, why exactly is Lois Lane naked in the bath in Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice? 1, in order to take a bath, it's kind of frowned upon to wear clothes. And 2, why can't Clark and Lois do a little... I hate to be that guy, but seriously, why is there never anything like this about an MCU movie? I got a perfect one for you. Slash Films, 90-year-old virgin tortures grandma with Alzheimer's. Ugh.
She's a slut.
I was gonna say something along that line.
It's complete horror.
And no way are we saying you can't dislike Batman v Superman. Film is and always will be subjective. I think Iron Man 3 and Captain Marvel were the biggest letdowns since my gas station dick pill experiment.
Haha, dangly part.
But they both made $1 billion, so what the fuck do I know? The rumor mill was nuts leading into Batman v Superman, so I've always believed disappointment was what some fans experienced. In the instance of Iron Man 3, it might have been more of a disappointment for me. The first movie after the Avengers, seeing the Iron Patriot in the trailers, and what I thought was a clever way to reimagine the Mandarin from his Fu Manchu stereotypical origins?
My name's Trevor Slattery.
Yeah. Fuck that piece of shit.
After the perceived negative reaction of the quote-unquote fanbase and critics, Warner Brothers decided to take drastic measures. These changes came despite the infancy of their universe and the direction Zack Snyder was heading. In May 2016, it was announced that famed comic book writer Geoff Johns would take over as head of the DC Cinematic Universe.
In the immortal words of Bill Walsh, hearing someone described as being able to fly by the seat of their pants always suggests to me a leader who hasn't prepared properly and whose pants may soon fall down. This describes WB executives to a T. With Snyder being the brainchild of the DC universe, the blame, rightly or wrongly, is going to fall upon him. But the lack of awareness by executives to this day is still mind-blowing. Decisions to butcher the theatrical cut, not backing their creative, and kneeling before the critics isn't a winning formula.
Without hesitation, articles of Snyder being stripped of any power were flooding the interwebs. Geoff Johns and John Berg would be running the show. Like it or not, this felt like a smart move at the time. This could only help the DCEU. Snyder's name was being dragged through the mud, and handing the ball off to a guy who reinvigorated DC Comics seemed to make good business sense. This would hopefully relieve some of the pressure from Snyder of being the figurehead of the DCEU and letting him do what he does best, make movies. We recall feeling that Johns could be the DCEU's Kevin Feige. Sadly, this would only do the opposite.
And an immediate push for hope and optimism would be the mission statement of the DCEU. In an article from The Vulture talking about John's rise to power, it says, one phrase came out of his mouth over and over again as he talked about DC Comics: hope and optimism. It's crystal clear that his vision for DC looks a lot lighter than the much maligned grimace Snyder provided earlier this year.
It started to become clear Snyder's name would continually be torn down throughout the trades, while Johns and Berg would be perceived as saviors.
It's a bird, it's a plane, no, it's casually Geoff Johns saving the DCEU. Audiences and critical reception was mostly unkind to the Zack Snyder created universe that's been described as dark, cynical, and devoid of any humor. Quietly made famed comic book writer and nerd hero Geoff Johns a senior executive in charge of DC's next wave of films, along with veteran production executive John Berg. Together, these two are meant to be the light at the end of the DCEU's dark and quickly crumbling tunnel.
Domination, domination, domination.
Y'all ready for this?
Spending too much time on this shit show of who is better would be pointless after what we talked about in part 2. But damn, if this is not the pinnacle of the DC versus Marvel wars, then slap me around and call me Susan.
This, ladies and gentlemen, was the inception of the Comic Movie Marks podcast, later on to become this little channel that you are watching now. The rhetoric circling this flame war was simply put, baffling.
Was either movie a masterpiece? No. Were they the biggest piles of shit since Iron Man 3? Of course not.
Don't hurt the face, I'm an actor.
Shut the fuck up, Trevor. At the time, though, Civil War was being held on this ridiculous pedestal. It seemed like it could do no wrong, had no faults. It was the greatest comic book movie of all time.
I still want to see the movie a few more times. I'm just saying, I'm playing with this idea that not only do I think this airport scene is the greatest action sequence we've ever seen in a comic book movie, I'm debating him. Give me a few more months, but I might end up saying this is the greatest action sequence I've ever seen in Hollywood cinema, period.
The biggest what the frick was how similar in plot and characters it was. Botched rescue mission in Africa, royalty from hidden civilizations, the repercussions from past movies, the death of the millionaire playboy's parents, characters wronged by the hero in blue turned suicide bombers. How are people not seeing this? All I can say about this particular war of the nerds, as stated before, film is subjective. And newsflash, you can like one without destroying the other, or, hear me out on this, you can actually like both films.
Holy shit.
As we stated in part 2, WB announced 3 weeks before the theatrical release of Batman v Superman that the Ultimate Edition would be available for home release immediately after the theatrical run was over. In June of 2016, we truly got our first look at the utter incompetence of the WB executives. This set a precedent for asinine decisions that would seemingly doom the universe from the start.
Ragging on this film relentlessly since I saw it, and then the second time I saw it, I even liked it less. But I gotta say, this Ultimate Edition, this must be the version that all those Warner Brothers people got up and did these standing ovation about that we heard so many months. They were like, oh,
it's literally, it's night and day. It's just, it's so crazy the difference between these versions. And I think the thing that I took away when the movie ended was I actually felt terrible, or I felt bad for Zack Snyder, because this is the movie he made and this is the version he wanted to release. Like, and I don't know if you guys ever saw, but I interviewed him at the junket and he said, I made a 3-hour version and I wish I could have released it, but you know, I can't. I got to release a 2.5-hour version.
Immediately after the Ultimate Edition was released, some fans started to apologize to Zack Snyder.
Hack Snyder successfully became Zack Snyder again. Can't wait for Justice League.
I would like to apologize to @Zack Snyder. I hated on the original version, but this Ultimate Edition of #Batman v Superman is really, really good.
At WB Pictures, you owe Zack Snyder an apology. Better release his vision of Justice League theatrically. #Batman vs Superman Ultimate Edition.
For starters, it's baffling that this specific line wasn't in the theatrical cut.
Men with power obey neither policy nor principle, Miss Lane. No one is different. No one is neutral.
He literally explains the motivations for both Bruce and Lex. It sets the tone for this movie perfectly. But alas.
There were 3 significant changes from the theatrical release to the Ultimate Edition. First, Lex's plan. In the theatrical cut, Luthor's plan really doesn't add up. It's easy to understand what drives him, a God complex.
I figured out way back. If God is all powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he is all good, then he cannot be all powerful. There we go. There we go. And now God bends to my will.
But the how did we get here is completely ripped out. The real Lex is rarely seen. He's a socially awkward Silicon Valley executive. Even the smallest things are planned. Just think about this. Do you really believe that him making a three-pointer right when the senators walk in was by chance? Even this moment here is staged. It's all part of this facade, this desire for control over everything.
For fun facts like this, be sure to check out BVS by the Minute on all podcast platforms.
When it comes to Luthor's plan in the theatrical cut, it's like playing chess with only half the pieces. Why was Superman blamed for the murders? Why were these criminals being killed in prison? Why did he bomb the Capitol building?
Too many questions. Too many questions.
As many would point out, Superman, yes, the same Superman in the title, had 43 lines of dialogue in the entire film. 42 if you don't count his screaming while a bone sword was jammed in his chest.
This would mostly be remedied in the Ultimate Cut. These essential scenes tell us so much about Clark. His growing distrust for the Dark Knight.
Well, there's a new kind of mean in him. He is angry, and he's hunting.
Inside they know. They know the mark all over. Guards don't care. That's the judge. One man decides who lives. How is that justice?
As well as a deeper explanation of why he doubts himself and his purpose.
To look him in his eye and ask him how he decides which lives count and which ones do not.
Thank you. I'm gonna need a little room to work. Bam.
So what clown at WB thought reducing the role of fucking Superman in a movie called Batman v Superman was a good idea?
Looking back at what's happened so far, Warner Brothers with Sujihara, I know he was popular within Warner Brothers, and there's a lot of people that liked him and that still apparently still like him and wish he hadn't left even after everything that happened and the way that he left. It's obvious to me, and I think it's pretty obvious to anybody that's listening to this podcast and that's followed what happened with DC, that a lot of the problems that came about with the building of their cinematic universe, including the reactionary tendency to keep changing back and forth every time, at the drop of a hat, they would freak out and change what they were going to do. And that was, Sujihara played a big role in that. His attitude toward the DC properties and general toward how he ran the studio. And Sujihara, a lot of that was his call. He wanted less Superman in Batman versus Superman, for example, and that's why a lot of those edits happened.
And finally, a very simple feat, a cohesive story. The Ultimate Edition gave several scenes time to breathe and context where it was seriously needed.
You would think that any competent studio executive would maybe see the errors in their decisions. Seemingly, their interference into the editing process caused a majority of the issues with the film. Spoiler, it's only gonna get worse.
July of 2016, San Diego Comic-Con will bring together the building blocks of the DCEU.
With the reactions to Batman v Superman, many were curious how this would affect that promised film slate from 2014. In 2015, Patty Jenkins and James Wan were confirmed to helm the first ever solo movies for Wonder Woman and Aquaman. Other than Aquaman getting slightly pushed back to December of 2018 and some per usual studio interference, which we'll talk about later in this video, these directors and visions stayed intact.
But when it comes to the fastest man alive, fate hasn't been so kind. The Flash overcame its first hurdle of replacing the film's original director, Seth Grahame-Smith, who parted ways with the project over creative differences. In June of 2016, Dope director Rick Famuyiwa took over directing duties. At the time, there was still hope that The Flash would make its planned release date of March 16th, 2018.
Phil Lord and Chris Miller were brought aboard to give the script an overhaul. Rumors at the time said Ray Fisher's Cyborg would have a significant role, and our villains would be Captain Cold and Golden Glider. Well, after his departure, Phil Lord would confirm meeting with Ray Fisher in a tweet. Had the pleasure of meeting Ray when we came close to doing Flash. Fisher, in an Instagram stream, would talk about meeting Phil Lord and Chris Miller in 2015. Rick was also responsible for casting Kiersey Clemens as Iris West and Billy Crudup as Henry Allen. These characters were introduced into Justice League as a setup for the Flash movie due in 2018.
Contrary to what is currently happening with Muschietti's Flash production, Famuyiwa's Flash had nothing to do with the Flashpoint comic. His movie would have explored racial and social themes, according to Mark Hughes at Forbes. Well, that didn't float WB's boat, and executives didn't want to go quite so far in that direction. They feared it didn't get close enough to the fun-loving humor's approach they wanted.
Rick Famuyiwa and WB would part ways in September of 2016 due to creative differences. Famuyiwa would make a statement. When I was approached by Warner Brothers and DC about the possibility of directing The Flash, I was excited about the opportunity to enter this amazing world of characters that I loved growing up, and still do to this day. At the time of this video, The Flash has had 4 directors and is finally making some headway, and will be in theaters, maybe, November 4th, 2022, 4.5 years after its initial release date.
And then there's Batman himself, Ben Affleck, and his much anticipated solo Batman movie. We're going to circle back on this debacle later on.
Well, the interesting thing is that
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
In October of 2014, David Ayer was confirmed to write and direct a Suicide Squad movie. The hype around Suicide Squad cannot be understated. While some might look back at it being a failure, which is revisionist history, but I digress, there is no doubt Suicide Squad's hype damn near matched Batman v Superman. With a fresh new take on the Joker, the trailers showing Batman would have a small role, and our first live-action adaptations of famous villains Harley Quinn, Deadshot, and Slipknot.
In 2016 for DC fans started off a little rocky, to say the least. BVS Theatrical getting hammered by critics, the line in the sand between DC and Marvel becoming more of a ravine at this point, etc., yada yada yada. But with Wonder Woman and Justice League on the horizon, there still seemed to be a slight glimmer of hope, right?
a man I knew used to say that hope is like your car keys.
This debauchery, we would later find out, would continue with Suicide Squad. What started as a high with the aforementioned high caliber names and the huge success of the first official trailer, this would quickly turn into the studio's first true butchering. Behind the scenes, the success of the trailer featuring Queen's iconic Bohemian Rhapsody would actually cause more harm than good. WB would look at the excited reactions and panic. Why, you ask? It was reported that the trailer is actually a bit misleading, in that it gives away every joke in the movie. In March of 2016, it was reported that Suicide Squad was going through some reshoots to steer it away from the dourness of Batman v Superman, and that Warner Brothers is still worried Suicide Squad isn't quite fun enough. After the Ultimate Edition was released, DC fans would start to raise questions when it came to the reshoots and reports that two edits being test screened, Ayer's cut and the studio cut. At the time, this felt like a mixed bag. With the aftermath of Batman v Superman, fans' trust in the system can only be described as toxic.
Suicide Squad would hit theaters August 5th of 2016. As with Batman v Superman, the critics would hammer it. Once again, DC has made a film that feels less original and more like they're just mimicking what they see Marvel doing. Its tone is all over the place, and we aren't given enough time to get to know the characters so we can care about their fates.
While reports of reshoots and studio interference are as prevalent in blockbuster cinema as superheroes, there is a jarring mash of tones and clumsy editing that suggests someone felt that something wasn't quite right on Suicide Squad.
WB and Ayer would continue to push the narrative that this was a David Ayer movie. In a joint statement to The Hollywood Reporter, yeah, that doesn't seem weird at all. Production president Greg Silverman and Ayer would say this was an amazing experience. We did a lot of experimentation and collaboration along the way, but we were both very proud of the results. This is a David Ayer film and Warner's is proud to present it.
David Ayer would even take to Twitter saying, "I love the movie and I believe in it. Made it for the fans. Best experience of my life."
Because today is a day for truth.
The trades, along with the studio and even David Ayer, would have us convinced the final version would be Ayer's cut. History would tell us otherwise.
David Ayer has since taken to Twitter to tell the real side of the story we didn't see in 2016. "I took the hits like a good soldier when the studio cut hit the streets. It's who I am. I watched my cut for the first time since it was abandoned. It's fucking amazing. I felt guilty for years, like I fucked up. Nope, it's fire. It's the tone of the Comic-Con trailer 100%. At one point, Ayer even described his movie as being ripped to pieces by the studio."
BVS got chewed up by the critics, and the success of Deadpool, the studio leadership at the time panicked. Then major elements of my cut were ripped out before I could mature the edit. Then Johns wrote pages I had to reshoot.
When asked about the ADHD-fueled use of music in Suicide Squad, Ayer would reply, "My cut was all score, no source cues at all. There were real scenes with incredible acting between Jared and Margot. Joker was terrifying, Harley was complex. His look worked better when he was scary. Softening him broke the illusion."
Imagine if Todd Phillips' film The Joker was reshot and recut because it was too dark. This is exactly what happened to Suicide Squad. Warner Brothers officially announced Suicide Squad in 2014. At the time, a 2016 release date seemed safely distant. Ayer would hit the ground running. It turns out Ayer wrote the script in like 6 weeks.
Finally, the anxious studio intervened. 2 edits were tested, one from Ayer and one from Warner Brothers with the help from Trailer Park, which had cut the teaser. And the studio's version won. So the project underwent millions of dollars worth of additional photography to get the film closer to the studio's lighter version. It's not as simple as more jokes, but again, it turns out there was truth in all those rumblings, that those Suicide Squad reshoots were meant to make the movie more fun.
Probably the biggest casualty of Suicide Squad was Jared Leto's Joker. Leto's Joker had the unenviable position of being the first Joker we've seen on the big screen since Heath Ledger's iconic portrayal.
Frustration is probably an understatement when it comes to how the Joker was handled. Not only did the reshoots involve adding humor, but it also made Leto's Joker less dark.
Leto wasn't one to mince words when it came to his frustration with the studio on how they mishandled the character.
It was clear to me that he wanted to make something really special. And that's incredibly compelling, you know, to be a part of something where the motivation is to do something different, to do something that is hopefully something we're all really proud of.
I mean, I always wish this film was rated R, and I had actually said that when we were starting. It felt like, you know, if a film was ever going to be rated R, it should be the one about the villains. Were there any that didn't get cut from the movie?
They got cut from the movie.
No, I'm asking you, were there any that didn't get cut from the movie?
Okay.
Well, to the people who want more Joker, I say, me too.
Yeah. Okay.
I did a lot of work in the film, and a lot was cut. So you have to ask the movie studio why.
Why? Because fuck them, that's why.
In spite of everything, Suicide Squad would end its run in theaters with a nearly $750 million worldwide box office. This is even more fascinating when you take into account China's official censorship guidelines that state that stories propagating passive or negative outlook on life, worldview, and value system are disallowed. Warner's even changed the title for local language in advance, calling it Special Task Force X to get suicide out of the title. Despite the MPAA's PG-13 rating and changing the name, Suicide Squad never got a China release. This is so significant because China is the second biggest market for movies, just behind the United States. Yet Suicide Squad pushed past that with an amazing box office.
Anybody saying Suicide Squad was a failure truly fell for the notion that critics and Rotten Tomatoes determine a movie's success.